Your card's been declined. The bartender said it flatly, like he'd said it 1,000 times before, like the words themselves had been worn smooth by repetition. He set the black Amex down on the polished mahogany between them, the gesture carrying just enough of an edge to let Adrian Sterling know this wasn't a mistake that could be fixed with a second swipe. Adrian stared at the card. His card. The one his father had given him on his 25th birthday with a speech about legacy and responsibility and the weight of the Sterling name. The one that had never, in 4 years, failed to clear. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words came out wrong, too crisp, too controlled, the voice he used in boardrooms when he was about to disembowel someone's quarterly projections. "There must be some misunderstanding." The bartender shrugged, already losing interest. "You want to try another card?" Adrian's hand moved to his wallet, but he already knew what he'd find. 3 other cards, all linked to the same accounts, all frozen with the same surgical precision. His father's signature move. Control through access. He'd walked out of the gallery without telling anyone where he was going, and somewhere in the intervening hours, someone had made a phone call. He could feel the heat climbing the back of his neck, that familiar prickling sensation that he'd spent years learning to suppress. In his world, embarrassment was a luxury you couldn't afford. It signaled weakness. It invited sharks. But this wasn't his world. This was a jazz bar in the Lower East Side called Vesper, all amber lighting and worn leather, and the kind of patrons who didn't recognize his face because his face belonged to a different zip code entirely. He'd wandered in 40 minutes ago, soaked from the rain, tie loose, wanting nothing more than to sit in the dark and let the saxophone player's melancholy notes wash over him like something medicinal. Now the whole room was watching. Not overtly. New Yorkers were too sophisticated for that. But he could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing, a collective tilt of the head, a brief pause in conversation, the particular stillness that descends when someone's misfortune becomes visible. "Well, well." The voice came from his left, sharp as broken glass. A woman in a perfectly tailored suit, dark navy, silk blouse, hair pulled back with the kind of severity that suggested she'd spent a lot of time perfecting the art of looking unimpressed, had turned on her barstool to face him. Her eyes swept over him with the clinical precision of someone appraising a forgery. "Let me guess," she continued, her voice rising just enough to carry. "The suit's borrowed. The watch is a knockoff. And you thought you'd find some rich older woman to pick up your tab tonight." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I think there's been a what? Misunderstanding?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "Honey, I've been in this city long enough to spot the type. You're a walking cliché. Pretty boy with expensive tastes and an empty wallet, trolling for a sugar mama. The only thing missing is the little red flower in your lapel." A few people laughed. He could hear them, the soft huffs of amusement, the murmured comments that he couldn't quite make out but could feel in his bones. His ears burned. His palms were clammy. He'd faced down hostile boardrooms and cutthroat competitors and his own father's glacial disappointment, but this was different. This was public. This was humiliation stripped of all dignity. "I'm going to pay," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word, which only made it worse. "I just need to make a phone call." "Oh, sure." The woman rolled her eyes. "Call your assistant. Tell her to wire the money. We've all heard that one." She turned to the bartender, gesturing with her chin. "You might want to call security. These guys can get aggressive when their con falls apart." Adrian's hand curled into a fist at his side. He could feel the anger rising, hot and acidic, but he forced it down. He would not lose control. He would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing him. "Don't bother." The voice came from behind him, soft and unhurried, like a warm breeze cutting through a cold room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't designed to carry. But something about its quality, the quiet authority, the utter lack of tension, made the woman in the suit pause mid-sentence. Adrian turned. She was standing at the corner of the bar, a book in one hand, a glass of what looked like sparkling water in the other. She wasn't dressed for this place, not exactly. A simple cream blouse, dark jeans, silver earrings that caught the amber light and turned it molten. Her hair was dark and fell just past her shoulders, and her face was the kind that took a moment to properly register, not because it was unremarkable, but because it was so composed, so completely at ease, that you didn't notice the sharpness in her eyes until you'd already been assessed by them. She walked toward them like she was walking through her own living room. No hurry. No performance. Just a woman moving through space with the unshakable certainty that no one would get in her way. "Leave him alone," she said, and she was speaking to the woman in the suit now, her tone almost conversational. "He's with me." The woman in the suit's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "I said he's with me." The dark-haired woman smiled, and it was a beautiful smile, warm, genuine, and somehow deeply unsettling. "Tonight was my idea. I asked him to meet me here." The bartender blinked. "Ma'am, his card was declined." "Yes, I know." She reached into her bag and pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills, which she placed on the bar with the same casual authority she brought to everything else. "That should cover his tab. And mine." She glanced at the woman in the suit, and her smile widened fractionally. "But you know how it is. Sometimes you have to test them first. See if they're worth the investment." The room went very quiet. Adrian stared at her. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat, a strange and unfamiliar sensation. She was looking at him now, and her eyes, brown, he noticed, deep and warm and impossibly knowing, held a glint of something that might have been amusement. Still deciding, she continued, and her voice dropped a register, becoming something almost intimate, whether his performance tonight merits overtime pay. The woman in the suit's mouth opened and closed. Her cheeks flushed a dull red. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, might push back, might try to salvage her dignity with another cutting remark. But Lumi, whoever she was, had already turned away. She had already dismissed the confrontation as beneath her notice. She walked back to her corner, settled onto her bar stool, and opened her book like nothing had happened. The jazz music swelled. The bartender pocketed the cash. The woman in the suit huffed something under her breath and turned back to her drink, her victory somehow, inexplicably, stolen. And Adrian stood there, in the middle of it all, feeling the weight of 100 curious eyes slide off him like water off glass. She hadn't asked him to follow her. She hadn't even glanced back. But he knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic entirely, that she expected him to come. He didn't think about it. He just walked. The bar stool next to hers was empty. He slid onto it, and she looked up from her book, a monograph on abstract expressionism, he noticed, with a cover he vaguely recognized from a gallery he'd visited last year. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, as if his gratitude was expected. As if she'd already accounted for it. "I'm Adrian." She marked her place in the book and turned to face him. Up close, she was even more striking, not because of any obvious beauty, but because she seemed so completely present. So completely there. Her eyes moved over his face, cataloging, understanding, and he had the unnerving sensation of being seen in a way he'd never quite been seen before. "Lumi," she said. Just that. No last name. No explanation. Nothing but the word itself, offered like a gift he didn't quite know how to accept. Adrian was aware, distantly, that he should leave. He should pay for his drink, thank her again, and walk out into the rain. He should call his lawyer, his accountant, his goddamn mother if necessary, and sort out whatever financial blockade his father had erected. But his body didn't seem to be following his brain's instructions. What was that? He asked. Back there. The hole, he gestured vaguely, unable to articulate it. What did you call it? Overtime? Lumi smiled, and it transformed her face entirely. Where before she'd been composed, watchful, almost clinical, now she was something else entirely. Something warmer. Something that made him want to lean closer. Merely an observation, she said. You looked like you needed a way out. I provided one. But why? She tilted her head, studying him. You're a man who's used to people wanting things from you, she said, and her voice was gentle, almost kind, but entirely direct. Your name, your attention, your money, your time. They all want something. And you're tired of it. You came here tonight because you wanted 5 minutes where no one asked you for anything. Adrian stared at her. How do you ordered a martini, she said, and there was that amusement again, flickering in the corners of her mouth. A Vesper, specifically. You asked for it with Hendrix, which isn't traditional, and you made a point of specifying exactly how many drops of lemon oil you wanted. That's not the order of a man who's here to impress anyone. That's the order of a man who knows exactly what he wants and is used to getting it. And you looked relieved when the bartender didn't recognize you. She shrugged, a small, elegant movement. You're famous, I assume. Or at least wealthy enough to be recognized. But you came here to be anonymous, and you were grateful for it, until the card declined and you became the center of attention. That's when you started to panic. Not because you couldn't pay. But because someone was seeing you. Adrian felt something shift in his chest. A strange, unidentifiable loosening. Like a muscle he hadn't known he'd been holding. You're very observant, he said. I'm paid to be. What do you do? She gestured to the book on the bar. I look at things other people don't know how to see. Paintings, mostly. But people, too, when it's necessary. An art critic? An art consultant. She smiled again, and this time it was almost playful. I help people understand what they're looking at. And occasionally, I help people understand what other people are looking at when those other people are in the business of selling things. Adrian laughed. It came out of him unexpectedly, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even himself. The tension in his shoulders eased. The knot in his chest loosened further. Interesting profession. Interesting survival strategy, she corrected. The world is full of beautiful things that don't know their own value. And people, too. My job is to point it out. You think everyone has value? Everyone who's willing to look for it. She held his gaze, steady and unblinking. You, for instance. His breath caught. I don't think you wear hand-stitched cuffs that cost more than most people's rent, she said, and the gentleness in her voice took the edge off the observation. But the fabric around your collar is frayed. You haven't replaced your shirts in at least a year because you don't pay attention to the small things, the things that don't matter to anyone but you. Adrian glanced down at his collar instinctively. She was right. He'd meant to have his shirts replaced. He'd mentioned it to his assistant, twice, but it had slipped through the cracks. It was such a small thing. I don't know how that means anything, he said carefully. It means you don't care about appearances. Not really. You care about performance. About outcome. You're wearing the cuffs because they're what's expected of you, but you don't replace the collars because you don't think anyone will notice. She leaned forward slightly. You're comfortable with the parts of your life that look right. You're uncomfortable with the parts that don't. Adrian sat back. His heart was beating faster than it should have been, and his palms had gone clammy again, and he had no idea why. You've made a lot of assumptions, he said. Have I? About what I want. About what I think. He stopped. Ran a hand through his hair. The wet strands were still damp from the rain, and the movement dislodged a droplet that ran down the back of his neck like an accusation. Yes? He looked at her. She was watching him with that same steady, unblinking focus, and something in him, something he'd been suppressing for years, wanted to answer. Wanted to tell her the truth. Wanted to see what she'd do with it. I'm tired, he said, and it was only half the truth, but it was the only part he could bear to say out loud. Lumi reached into her bag and pulled out a small, white card. She slid it across the bar until it rested against his elbow. My number, she said. In case your family unfreezes your accounts and you find yourself with a sudden desire for intelligent conversation. Adrian took it. His fingers brushed hers, and the contact sent a jolt up his arm, sharp, electric, completely unexpected. Come find me when you've figured out what you want. She smiled, and it was soft and knowing and made his chest ache in ways he'd forgotten were possible. I'm usually around. You're not going to tell me more? More what? About yourself. He glanced at the card, then back at her. Lumi. Just Lumi? That's all you need for now. She stood, gathering her book, and he felt the space around him grow suddenly cold. Good night, Adrian. She didn't wait for his response. She walked toward the door, and he watched her go, watched the way the amber light caught her hair, the easy confidence of her stride, the way she didn't look back even once. The bartender approached him. Another round? Adrian stared at the door, already closing behind her. He could hear the saxophone player's mournful solo winding down, could hear the murmur of conversations resuming around him, could feel the rain still falling outside like a curtain between him and the rest of the world. No, he said, and his voice came out rough, unguarded. No, I think I'm done here. He slid off the stool, pocketed the card, and walked out into the night. The rain had stopped by the time he emerged from the subway, but the city was still slick with it, the streetlights reflecting off the wet asphalt like scattered diamonds. Adrian walked without a destination, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his mind churning through the events of the evening like a film reel. He should have been angry. His father had frozen his accounts. His credit had been humiliated in public. His reputation, such as it was, had been called into question by a stranger whose opinion he'd never cared about in his life. But all he could think about was her. Lumi. The way she'd stood up and spoken, her voice so calm, so utterly in control of the situation. The way she'd looked at him, as if she'd already seen through every wall he'd ever built and found something worth protecting behind them. The way she'd touched his hand. He stopped walking and pulled out his phone. 2 missed calls from Clarissa. 3 from his father's office. 4 from his lawyer, which probably meant the accounts were frozen permanently. He didn't call any of them back. He looked at the card in his hand instead. White, unassuming, with nothing on it but a name and a number. Lumi. Come find me when you've figured out what you want. What did he want? For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Sterling had no idea. The gallery was a disaster of the highest order. Adrian stood in the corner of the ballroom, watching his mother's social circle swirl around him in a sea of champagne and condescension, and felt something inside him go very, very still. It was the same feeling he had before. The same sense of being trapped in a narrative he hadn't authored, forced to play a role that fit less with each passing year. "My darling boy." His mother appeared at his elbow, resplendent in a gown that cost more than most people's cars, her hand clutching his arm with the desperate grip of a woman who'd spent decades learning to hold on. "Don't slouch, darling. Clarissa's family is here. You need to look polished." Adrian straightened. He was already 6 feet of impeccable tailoring and controlled demeanor, but he straightened anyway, because it was easier than arguing. "Where is she?" he asked, and his voice was perfectly neutral. "I think she's talking to the trustees. Something about the endowment." His mother beamed. "She's so involved, darling. So dedicated. She'll make a wonderful wife." Adrian said nothing. He'd known Clarissa his whole life. She was the daughter of a family his family had done business with for 3 generations. She was beautiful, accomplished, and universally admired. She was also, in ways that mattered deeply to Adrian, completely wrong. Not wrong in any easily articulable way. She was kind. She was intelligent. She was everything his mother wanted in a daughter-in-law and everything the Sterling name demanded in a wife. But she'd never looked at him the way Lumi had. She'd never seen past the name, past the cuffs, past the performance. She didn't know him, not the real him, the one who sometimes forgot to replace his collars and ordered martinis with Hendrix because he'd read about the recipe in a book and thought it made him sound sophisticated. No one knew him. No one until tonight. "You look distracted, darling." "I'm fine, Mother." "You're not fine. Your father told me about the accounts." Her voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "What did you do to provoke him? You know how he gets when you disappear without explanation." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I needed air." "Air." She laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You needed air, so you disappeared for 5 hours, and now your father is threatening to cut you off entirely." "Air, Adrian? Is that what you're calling it?" He looked at her. His mother, who had never once asked him what he actually wanted. His mother, who had spent her entire adult life molding herself into the perfect accessory to a man who'd never learned to see past his own reflection. "I'm going to take a walk," he said, and the words came out before he could stop them. "A walk?" "Adrian, the auction starts in 20 minutes, I need a walk." He didn't wait for her response. He was already moving, sliding through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd been navigating hostile territory since childhood. The room was full of people he recognized and people he'd grown up with and people who'd known him since he was in short trousers, but none of them stopped him. He was too good at making himself invisible. Too practiced at the art of disappearing inside a room full of people. Outside, the air was cold. The rain had started again, a fine mist that clung to his skin like an accusation. He stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes, and felt something in him ease. He'd been running from this life for years. From the expectations and the obligations and the crushing weight of the Sterling name. From the family dinners where his father dissected his failures over the main course. From the endless parade of eligible young women his mother paraded before him like livestock. But tonight, he'd found something else. He didn't remember deciding to go back to Vesper. He found himself on the subway again, his shoes soaked, his collar still frayed, his pockets empty of everything except her card. He pulled it out and stared at it, the white rectangle so ordinary, so insignificant, and yet somehow more important than everything he'd left behind. He got off at the stop. He walked the familiar streets. And when he pushed open the door of the jazz bar and heard the familiar saxophone and smelled the familiar scent of whiskey and old wood, his heart was beating so fast he could barely breathe. She was there. Same corner. Same book. Same glass of sparkling water. She looked up when he entered, and for one terrible moment, he thought she might not remember him. Might dismiss him the way she dismissed everyone else. But then she smiled. I was wondering when you'd come back, she said. Adrian crossed the room and sat down beside her. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. He didn't know what he was doing, only that he had to be here, had to see her, had to feel that strange, unsettling sense of being seen. I don't know what I want, he said, and his voice came out rough, unpolished, nothing like the polished performance he'd learned to maintain. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know, take a breath, she said. You're still wearing your collar. He looked down. She was right. His collar was frayed. He'd meant to replace it. He'd meant to do a lot of things. What are you running from? Lumi asked. Adrian laughed. It came out wrong, broken. My father. My mother. My fiancé. My entire life. He ran a hand through his hair, and it came away damp. Everyone wants something from me. Everyone needs something. And he stopped. I don't know what I need. I've never needed anything. She nodded slowly, like that made sense. Like she'd already predicted it. Sit down, she said, and when he didn't move, she added, I won't bite. I promise. Adrian sat. The stool was warm from his earlier presence, or maybe that was just the memory of her. He was too aware of her beside him. The warmth of her proximity. The gentle curve of her jaw. The way she looked at him like he was the only person in the room. You know what I want. She said. What? I want you to tell me the truth. She tilted her head. About who you really are. Not the man who wears hand-stitched cuffs and orders martinis. The one who hides inside that life. The one who came to a jazz bar on a rainy Tuesday because he couldn't bear to be where everyone expected him to be. Adrian stared at her. I don't know how to do that, he said. I don't know who that person is. Try. She reached out and touched his hand, and the contact made his breath catch. Just try. He opened his mouth. And then, to his own surprise, he did. My name is Adrian Sterling, he said, and the words felt heavy, leaden, like they carried the weight of everything he'd ever refused to say. My father owns half of Manhattan. My mother owns everything else. And Clarissa, she's my fiancée, apparently. We're getting married in 3 months. At least, that's the plan. And what do you want? I don't, try again. He swallowed. His throat was dry. His hands were sweating. I want to be seen, he said, and the confession came out in a rush, like something he'd been holding back for years. I want someone to look at me and see me. Not the name. Not the money. Not the family. Just me. Lumi nodded slowly, like he'd said something important. That's a good start, she said. Adrian laughed. That's it? That's all you're going to say? What else is there to say? She smiled, and it softened her whole face. You've just told me the most honest thing you've said all night. Do you even realize that? He blinked. You don't know how to accept being seen, she said. You've been hiding so long that the act of stepping into the light feels like a violation. But it isn't. It's freedom. Adrian stared at her. Who are you? He asked. Someone who sees things others don't, she said. That's all. No. That's not all. She shrugged. It's all you need to know. The conversation continued after that. He couldn't have said what they talked about, only that the words came easily, naturally, like they'd known each other forever. She asked him about his childhood, and he found himself telling her about the summer he'd spent at his grandfather's estate, learning to ride horses and chasing fireflies and feeling, for the first and last time, like he was allowed to be a child. She told him about her work. About the artists she championed. About the moments of discovery, when a painting that no one understood suddenly became transparent, luminous, undeniable. Like you, she said, and he startled. What? Like you. She held his gaze. You're a work in progress, Adrian. A masterpiece waiting to be uncovered. You just don't know it yet. Adrian didn't know what to say. He'd been praised before, flattered before, but never like this. Never like she actually meant it. I think, he said slowly, that you might be the most dangerous woman I've ever met. Because I see you? Because you make me want to be seen. She smiled again, and the expression was so warm, so honest, so unlike anything he'd ever experienced, that he felt something in his chest ease. Then let me, she said. Let me see you. 2 hours later, the bar was closing. Adrian had lost track of time entirely, and when he looked at his phone, he saw 12 missed calls from Clarissa, 8 from his father, and a text from his mother that read, simply, "We need to talk." He didn't respond. I should go, he said, but his legs didn't move. You should, Lumi agreed. But you won't. How do you know? She looked at him with those knowing eyes. Because you don't want to leave yet. And I don't want you to either. Adrian felt his pulse spike. What are you saying? She leaned in, and for a moment, he thought she might kiss him. But she didn't. She just looked at him, her face inches from his, her breath warm on his cheek. I'm saying, she murmured, that I'd like to see you again. The accounts, forget the accounts. Her voice was soft, gentle, impossibly kind. Forget your father and his money and the whole ridiculous circus. Just tell me what you want. Adrian closed his eyes. He could feel her there, inches away, the warmth of her body a promise. He could feel the weight of the evening on his shoulders, the weight of his whole life, everything he'd ever been and everything he was supposed to be. And then he opened his eyes and looked at her. I want you, he said. The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Lumi smiled. It was a slow, luminous thing, like watching a sunrise. Good, she said. Because I think I want you, too. He didn't kiss her. Not that night. But he found her hand under the bar, and she didn't pull away. And when he finally left, with the promise of another meeting, he felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd been wearing for so long he'd forgotten he was wearing it at all. He walked home in the rain, alone, exhilarated. And for the first time in years, Adrian Sterling had no idea what came next. But he couldn't wait to find out.
Subscribe to me for more content.